Hello and welcome to Early Childhood Ireland's podcast, which features interviews and discussions on all issues relating to high quality in the early years and school-age care sector. In our episodes, we've a range of speakers who are leaders in the areas that matter to Early Childhood Ireland members. This podcast series is proudly supported by Aricus Insurance, which offers a comprehensive range of cover at discounted premiums for both business and personal insurance products. So visit www.aricus.ie for more information. I'm Maura Corbett and I work with Early Childhood Ireland. This year marks the second year of the International Day of Play. The theme for the International Day of Play this year is Choose Play Every Day. I have to say this theme certainly resonates with us in Early Childhood Ireland. We're passionate about play and the immeasurable benefits it has for children, and we know we're not alone in this commitment to the importance of play for all children. So I'm really, really pleased today to be joined by a person who shares that belief that play is fundamental. Dr Aaron Bradbury is the Principal Lecturer for Early Childhood and Early Years at Nottingham Trent University in the UK. He's a member of the Coalition for Early Years on the Birth to 5 Matters non-statutory guidance for the Early Years Foundation stage. He chaired and wrote the Equalities and Inclusion section with colleagues in the sector for the EYFS. He's the co-chair of the Early Childhood Studies Degree Network, and he has edited recently a guide called Play Matters. Aaron has a passion for making the voice of the child, nurturing through a diverse lens, and the pioneers of early childhood, the foreground of practice. So some really important aspects there that are so important to keep to the foreground. Aaron, I'm really delighted you agreed to chat today about all things play.
Thank you for having me. I'm really looking forward to the discussion.
So, in my intro, I mentioned about the Play Matters publication. We'll put a link in the show notes. You've been involved in that recently. It's a lovely piece of work. And one of the things that I love is how the book starts with joy. So, I'd just like to tease out with you, why do you think joy is important in relation to play? Um, do you think we've kind of maybe made it all too serious?
I'm really glad that you've mentioned what I mean. We within Play Matters, we very much wanted to make sure that we thought about what first chapter do we want to talk about, and I think you've just hit the nail on the head there. In the fact that we've missed the joy aspect of play. We're taking what's happening is we're taking play, and I say we policymakers are taking play a little bit down a more serious route. And there is an element of seriousness with play. But actually, within Play Matters, the editorial team decided that actually we needed to take it back to the child, that actually it shouldn't be about outcomes. It should be very much about the child, and that actually there should be an element of joy and fun and that kind of imagination that children bring to play absolutely at the forefront of the document.
Yeah, I think there's, of course, play is a serious business, and we know all the things that children learn and absorb from play. But primarily, and I suppose I'm reminded of Loris Malaguzzi's such a famous quote about from Reggio of, nothing without joy. I mean, if the fun is taken out of play and it becomes all about, learning goals and aims and the joy is sucked out of it, and we need that. We need to scale back on this. We can make the learning visible to the policymakers, the inspectors, and whatever. But for the child, it should be about joy, really.
Absolutely. And really we talk about the voice of the child. We talk about the lens of seeing it through the eyes of the child. But actually, do we truly do that when we're thinking about play? I think we've lost sight of what we really truly mean about the voice of the child. And joy for me is that voice of the child. It's emphasizing that play is a birthright, it's not a reward, it's actually it's kind of a rite of passage, really, it's something that kind of happens, that we should be celebrating that rite of passage for children. And us as adults, we still play, there's still an element of playfulness, and we should never lose sight of that. But that joy within play brings a sense of belonging. It gives children self-worth, Um, and most importantly, which we're losing within education, is creativity. It allows children that time to be creative. Even when there's no learning objectives associated to it, or that actually we're not necessarily attaching a certain activity to a lesson plan or an outcome, that learning is still taking place, that joy, that fun. Let's not take that fun aspect away from play as well.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned creativity actually, because that's a big hobby horse of mine is, if children don't have the opportunity to choose play that is open-ended, chosen by them, uh, for as long as they choose to, with the materials that are available to them, whatever those, wherever, inside, outside, babies, toddlers, young children, they don't have the opportunity to develop creativity and, real creativity
Yeah,
and curiosity. I think curiosity is another really important part of the joy of, being able to follow their own interests. And, as I say, we can make the learning visible ourselves afterwards, but we're not making children aware of, you need to do this today because we need you to, fulfill this learning goal or whatever.
absolutely. I mean, I think we do have to acknowledge from our practitioners' perspectives and our teachers' perspectives around, the curriculum, the acknowledge the pressures of curriculum and accountability. We are accountable. Our inspectorates make us accountable, and government and policy makes us a little bit more accountable. But actually, we should never shy away from advocating for play. That as early years professionals, we value play. I think we do
Mm.
value play. I think we need to not be afraid to stand up and say, actually, I'm taking a step back at the moment because learning is taking place, language is taking place. I'm just listening to what the children are doing. I'm observing what the children are doing. And I think we've got to get back to that state of why observation's so key. Because if we really, really, truly want to value the voice of the child, if we want to see joy and learning and allowing children those next steps, of learning, it happens through play. Most of our settings that we set up are adult driven. We've set up the environment. So we've set up with the environment with learning in mind anyway. Why do we then need that other layer of adult interaction? Why can't we have it child led? Because we've set that environment up for learning. So we don't need to add another layer on top of that. And I think that's where we're losing sight of what play and the value of play within our earlier settings, our early childhood settings. It is so important.
That's an excellent point, actually, about the environment being set up to support learning. So, if that's done properly, the learning will happen
Yeah.
anyway. Um, I suppose that brings me on to, kind of the creativity, and I'd like to talk to you a little bit about kind of, nurturing and relationships and developing friendships and that type of thing. Tell us your thoughts on how play can provide that kind of nurturing
Yeah.
environment and atmosphere.
I mean, it's an interesting area because I've written a lot with my colleague Tamsin Grimmer on love and nurture, actually, and how the environment and how children can really kind of be supported through that love and nurture or nurturing environment, which ultimately comes down to play. And I think play builds relationships. I think we've got a lot of children now going through our education systems with higher mental health needs. The children are feeling the pressure just like our colleagues are feeling the pressure. And I think that we just need to slow down a little bit and allow our children the space to, during those formative 5 years, in the UK, um, to slow down, because it's not a race. A learning should not be a race. It should be, that 0 to 5 is a time where you're just finding out who you are as a child. You're just finding out how the world works and why do we do things the way that we do. And I think when you're that age, you're building relationships. It's so important to allow children to find their place within their settings socially and emotionally. And I think sometimes we're rushing through. We've got this kind of, I'm sure you have it there, where we're talking constantly about these COVID children, and they're coming through and they need saving in some way, because actually they don't need saving. What we need to focus on is how can play really support their emotional and social needs. And the way that we can kind of support their next steps is really by slowing down and thinking about what do they need now? What can we support them with now? And actually, for most of our children, whether they're COVID children or not, that social and emotional, that personal, social and emotional development and how we support that is fundamental. And the way we do that is we don't need all these funky schemes, and we need to focus it back on play and really thinking about what activities, how can we set up our environment so children are connecting with each other, but not just with themselves, but with us as adults as well. How are we creating those environments where children feel safe and secure to voice the actual voice of the child and really be confident in themselves. But for me, that is what truly the voice of the child is. When we're thinking about how are we encapsulating, how are we capturing the voice of the child, it has to be done through that lens of play. And they tell you a lot, don't they? They tell
Absolutely.
you so much when they're playing without
Mm.
actually physically talking to you. And I always say the best place for that is the home corner, the role play area, where they're so engrossed in being who they are, in their imaginative world, that you see the joy and the fun but there's so much language going on, there's so much connection, there's so much learning about different cultures. And it's interesting, isn't it, that you hear them saying, well, my kitchen doesn't look like this, it looks like this. And that's where they're learning from each other. They're learning about their family culture and their position. And that's done through play. Absolutely.
The kitchen story brings me back to a learning story that we got in from a setting where there was, I think, maybe a 4-year-old and maybe 2.5 or 3-year-old. And the parent of one of the children, I think, was a chef. And they were making bolognese. And the younger child said, here's the jar of sauce. And the older child was, that's not how you make sauce. And, you start with the onions and, about, figuring out how, not just even about, cultures in the kind of maybe diversity way, but just the way different homes are
Absolutely.
all
Yeah.
different. I love the idea of love and nurture. I think, when I did my master's, that it was my dissertation was what's love got to do with it, and that idea, as Jules Page talks about,
Yeah, absolutely.
professional love. And I think we need to, very much own that it's a loving, nurturing space for children, and
Absolutely.
that
Yeah. And for the colleagues that work within that space as well.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. We need to name and value that piece of nurturing and encouraging children's own friendships, that we're not, you sit with this person this day, and
Yeah.
moving children around, letting the friendships and relationships develop themselves in their own way. And when we were emailing beforehand, I mentioned about our curriculum framework having been updated recently.
Yeah.
And one of the very key parts of that is the idea of slow relational pedagogy. It's a fundamental part of the revision of Ashler, and you know, how important it is absolutely to slow down. 5-year-olds, 3, 4, 5-year-olds should not be stressed.
No, no, not at all. And unfortunately, we see it all the time, with some of the schemes that we're being asked to do in our earlier settings, specifically, for example, I'll use an example around phonics. I have nothing against phonics, learning sounds and phonics and reading is important. It's a part of learning. But when you see children sitting with a teacher or, an early years practitioner, and it's time to do their phonics at a table, and they're doing flashcards and they're crying, that's not going to adopt a love of reading and of literacies and communication. So I think we just have to really think about, let's slow down. Phonics can be done through play, through opportunities where the teacher can be in the moment with the children, modeling sounds. I have no problem with teaching. I have no problem with having actual time with children where teaching takes place. But what we shouldn't have is a two-tier model where that's seen as in more important than the play, because actually what's really important is that we embrace both, because within our earlier spaces, play and adult-led teaching should be valued together, and I think that's really important.
That kind of takes us back to the joy bit
Yeah.
that, I mean, if children are crying and upset because of the way the teaching, the adult-led bit is happening, there's no joy and therefore there's no learning.
And I
So,
think that's slowing down. I mean, Alison Clark talks about it,
mm,
and for me, that slowing down, that slow pedagogy is something that we really need to endorse.
mm,
I think we're trying to, I think it does talk about it in Play Matters, where we're trying to build, we're trying to go too quickly for our children. Um, and we're not thinking about that relational play. We're not thinking about, that exploration, that co-regulation. We just want to get them to this end point, rather than actually thinking about the longer term effects of around, attachment and even identity. Some children just aren't ready at that time to do it because
yeah.
they might be younger developmentally, younger. And we have these tick lists, don't we? We have this mindset of saying, well, they're all now in kindergarten or reception, so they must be able to do it, And some children, there's a whole year gap between them. And I think that's where we lose sight of why play is so fundamental in supporting that rhetoric, really.
I was mentioning to you that we're in Early Childhood Ireland. A very central part of our work over the past year or so has been Eco Emotions. It's a resource that we have on our website, kind of weaving the importance of emotional development, co and self-regulation with sustainability. So we've kind of touched on, the relationships, the regulation and so on. Do you think that play plays a role in supporting children towards an understanding of sustainability, valuing the natural world, valuing what's in the natural world, and treasuring it, and so on?
I think sustainability is a really interesting topic, actually, because again, we have highlighted sustainability within Play Matters because we do have to look to our future. And as part of our future, people very much fit within the realms of sustainability. So I think it's really important that, our youngsters learn about the world, around, nature and science, and but also around people as well, and around those eco, emotions. But I think it's also important that we touched on it in Play Matters, that children learn about grief, that they learn about wonder, that they learn about hope, but also the responsibility that comes through play, that actually we're allowing that sustainability opportunities that come with play. And it's really interesting because you see children kind of taking control of their position within sustainability. And we can transfer that outside. Again, it's what adults have created in that natural world through mud kitchens, through nature play, but keeping at the heart of loose parts. and through that, it kind of gives us a bit of an element of empathy for the planet, that actually by touching the things outdoors and understanding nature, it just gives us that little empathy about, oh, there's a little thing growing over there. And actually we start seeing something grow. And the conversation that comes through that, again, I think empathy for our planet is fundamental. But sustainability is not just a topic that we think, oh, it's just another thing that we're trying to achieve through play. But actually, sustainability could be a way of being, that and play helps us rehearse that, I think, for a kind of more just future, and I think children kind of come at it through that lens. I genuinely do. Children can come through that kind of lens. It's only when they start getting onto the internet and phones and kind of understanding things a bit differently, because I think that awe and wonder, that kind of joy, we go back to joy, that
Mm.
imagination that they bring is so exciting.
I like that idea of empathy for nature, and again bringing it back to joy, which has kind of turned into a bit of a thread through
It
through
is,
our
yeah,
our
well,
conversation.
yeah,
But like somebody said, it's important to support children around the ideas of sustainability and valuing the planet and so on, but doing it in a way that it doesn't, I suppose, make them feel responsible
no,
for, what has happened, that they can, I suppose we are where we are and we need to get better and everybody has a role to play in it, but that we're not scaring children. We're not,
no.
giving them too much gloom, about it. So the idea of empathy for the planet, I like that idea.
I also think with sustainability, we have to learn about, life, life in general, that, we're not infinite. We're never going to live on forever,
Mm,
and actually what happens, with the life cycle and, and I think I don't think we do enough of that through, sustainability, that, you know, for example, children will not understand grief as such, but they will understand that loss and, and bereavement and things. They understand that people disappear, and I think it's an opportunity for us to build that interplay, around animals. There's always something that's lost its life in the playground, or that they always find the dead fox, or that children always find something, don't they?
mm,
That
yeah.
our conversation opens up a whole discussion where that's where I mean about empathy for the planet. I think it's something we should be talking about, because that's sustainability for animals. For ourselves, it's talking about the future and how we can look after each other as well.
Yeah.
Um,
That, that's really interesting. Sometimes you hear people with, the goldfish dies and there's a mad panic to replace the goldfish by the
yeah,
morning, instead of, helping children to understand that, you know, these things happen.
mm,
It's part of life.
mm,
Nobody, because they're encountering grief and loss potentially, with the people in their lives. So if they
absolutely.
have an understanding of it, um, through the natural world,
Yeah,
it can help them manage if there's, bereavement in the family, granny or granddad or whatever. So
yeah.
that's a really good point. Really good point on
Yeah, and I think with that
sustainability.
goldfish, it's an opportunity that if you just replace it, that goldfish has had a position in that child's life. It might have been for 2 weeks, it might have been for 2 months, it might have been for 2 years. And for some of those children, it's an opportunity for them to say goodbye, through a controlled way of doing it, but actually showing empathy and understanding that, Martin the goldfish, it is time to go and we will replace him, but actually let's all say goodbye to Martin. And some children will understand that, some children won't. But I think it's about allowing children to have that opportunity. And what's really interesting then is they'll probably take that into their play, where they're talking about it, and they're and you'll hear them nattering to each other, Martin's gone, and
Mm,
but with each other through, if they're in an environment that's secure, where they feel safe, those conversations will happen.
will happen.
And that's where love and nurture kind of comes into its own as well.
So where now for play, Aaron? I mean, do you think we need to do more? You've talked about slow pedagogy and slowing down the importance of valuing play. How do you think we can do more to enshrine the value of play and
Yeah.
support educators and families to, I suppose, enable children to choose play every day, as the theme is
Yeah.
this year?
I think the main thing we've got to do is we've got to listen to the research and the science and the practice that tells us that play is important. What we've got, unfortunately, is people who write our policy that have never really truly understood play themselves. And I think if you don't understand play or you don't value play, you're never going to get it. So I think we have to listen to the people that get it. We have to listen to the children that that yes, education is I teach in a university. Education is social mobility. It gets you where you want to get to. But unfortunately, so does play. So does slowing down, giving children that time. They've still got another 15 year, 15 years to kind of cram in all of that learning. So I think for me, it's about mindsets. I think we need to change our mindset that play isn't just this kind of, oh, it's just what they do. That actually there's real science behind play, brain development, brain architecture. Child development has moved on light years since we've really started to bring brain development into the forefront. And the way we've learned that really is through children's play and understanding how children learn and move and develop. But also some of the pioneers, like, you've talked about, I'm talking people like Bronfenbrenner, Montessori, um, even Steiner, um, we've got
So
some
many of
really
them.
good,
So many
yeah,
of them.
Frobel,
Mm.
they'd be looking at us a bit strangely now, I think, that why are we even contemplating that play is not so serious? And I think we just need to go back to what does the research, what does the science, what do those pioneers truly tell us? And what they tell us about play is that actually it's the children's lens of learning, that actually if we truly value the child, we need to value play. Um, I think the other aspect as well is, we need adults to choose play. And I think we've moved into a bit of we've got to allow ourselves to let go of control. And I
Mm.
think that's the biggest issue here, that actually we we as educators want to try and control the narrative. And I think we've got to let that go. I think we've got to, we've set our environment up. We know what we've set up within our environment. You're still needed within that environment, but I think you've got to let that control go. And I think that's really, really important. Um, but actually, I also think as practitioners and educators, we have to understand where our position is within the playful environment. That yes, as a teacher, you're there to teach. And like I've said, that balance is really, really important. But, it isn't just following the policy line, it's about what's really important for your children in your classroom, in your setting. But for me, play has become not just pedagogical, I think it's become quite political, because I think what's happened in early childhood is we're just not being heard. We're not being taken seriously because, oh, we're just early childhood, we're not really proper education because we're under 5 and therefore formal schooling, and that's the difference, that I think we've got to be taken seriously. And we shouldn't be seeing play as an act of resistance. We should be embracing it. And but it's we should be resisting, as advocates of play, that rushingness, that measurement, and standardization. And that is the crux of it, because you can't necessarily measure play. You can see it, you
Mm.
know what's happening, but actually there's no metric to it. So I think that's the issue here, that actually there's about letting go, of control, but also that you can't necessarily measure it. And I think that's what it comes down to.
I think the policy context in the UK and here is a little bit different in that regard, in that, obviously I'm not as familiar with the EYFS as I am with Ashton, but play is very much valued within Ashton, our curriculum framework, and as I say, in the revision, the ideas of slow relational pedagogy and so on are the value of relationships and interactions. And Ashter is a basis for our inspections. So I think we're, of course, sometimes inspectors vary and understandings can vary, and it depends on maybe sometimes the professional background and so on. But I think we're quite fortunate that we have a policy context here that values play, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you maybe have more of a struggle to get play recognised in the
Yeah,
UK.
I think it's an interesting one because children do play in our earlier settings.
Mm,
I think we're afraid to call it play. And I think that's the difference. We want to call things play-based learning. We want to add the word learning to it because learning for some reason in the UK has more of an impact. But actually we need to get back to understanding that if we understand the child, we understand play. And I think for me, that's where we need to move to. So I think it's interesting that Ireland are moving more towards that kind of play focus. It
mm,
sounds very relational pedagogy, which is great. I think we probably aspire to do that, but I think we just sometimes have a lot of top-down pressure that kind of comes with the school readiness rhetoric, and we
mm.
lose sight of play. We're afraid to use the word play because it kind of comes with this, like, well, they're just playing, and yeah, actually just playing is good enough.
Is fine, and
Um,
play matters, and that it has an intrinsic value in itself,
Absolutely,
not
absolutely.
not just as a vehicle for learning or not
No.
just as a vehicle for development. It matters in its own right.
Yeah, yeah, and the reason why we wrote that document, which by the way is that it's a free document.
Mm,
It was done by volunteers. Nobody's made any money. There was over 100 people that got together to write it because we felt that it needed saying that play really does matter. What's really lovely about it though is it's been kind of taken across the world now. People are really interested in it. Um, and for me, we should be choosing for our youngest children play. We should be choosing that every day. We should be making sure that play is a presence. It should be connection. Um, and the possibilities that come from play are just endless. You know,
absolutely.
you only have to follow a child around and they're making sushi in the home corner, or you're listening that my kitchen doesn't look like that, and then one
Mm,
child says, "Oh, I've got an island," and then a whole, if you've got an island, you must be, living in a large house, and people then start to, and it's really interesting the conversations that they have. But in that choice, we don't just honor the child, but the world that we want to build. And I think that's what we have to go back to, that, we shouldn't be building robots because that's not what we want. We want
not at
children
all.
to come into our education system strong, ready to start, feeling very confident, self-assured, and ready to learn. And unfortunately, we're seeing a lot of children coming through that just don't have those skills. And you go back to a document like Play Matters, it's because we're just stifling that creativity. We're stifling that opportunity for children to learn through play.
Well, I love the idea of honouring the child and their right to play. So I think that's a lovely point to end on.
Well,
Aaron, thank you so much. Really enjoyed the conversation,
thank
and thank
you.
you for taking the time. And we will link to the document in the show notes and
Oh,
so
that's
on.
lovely.
So thank you so much, Aaron.
Thank you.
And thank you for listening to this episode of Early Childhood Ireland's podcast, which is proudly supported by Aricus Insurance. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe, spread the word to your friends and colleagues, and stay tuned for our next episode.